when you start looking at what the customer buying patterns are, and as the evolution is happening, and you got somebody the way they're buying now, and they're, just buying personal insurance, but they become the business owner, and now they've had that experience, they enjoy that, they're expecting that now. When they buy their small commercial policy, they want that same interaction and flexibility. It's just not there yet. Truly making an omni-channel experience for them, and allowing flexibility for either the way, whether you're dealing with embedded or you're dealing with usage based, or just the types of policy coverage add-on takeoffs. It needs to be easy. Nothing about the processing side of insurance is easy today. The experience, I think, falls off the cliff for most companies out there. We have to start to be able to deliver that, or the one who does is going to be the choice. Hi, this is Mark Seich from Berkley Fire Marine, and this is the future of insurance.
Mark, it's good to sit down with you. And I've told you this before, but you come from a space that's closer to where I spent the second half of my carrier career, being more in the specialty lines and the commercial side. And I feel like we've so much focus on personal lines. There's nothing wrong with personal lines, but I love getting back to the more specialty kind of stuff, the commercial stuff, the more complex stuff. So I'm excited to get some time with you today.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be on here and be able to talk through it.
There's two things in particular I want you to give people some insight on. One is, for those who don't know Berkley Fire Marine, kind of give us a sense of the lines that you write and the space that you're in, but also your role, which is not something that we tend to see in this space. So, where did that come from? What is it that you focus on? Kind of give us the whole view here.
Yes. Yeah, so Berkley Fire Marine is a WR Berkley company, right? We're the specialty niche market for inland marine within the organization. So that includes things like motor truck cargo, builders risk, contractors equipment, solar kind of energy aspect, basically anything that is property temporarily moving or doing something like that in a short-term fashion, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the crux of what we do here, but we write countrywide, kind of have agents and brokers across the country. So how my role came about, initially, the focus was around, sales, marketing, distribution, and kind of as we were growing a digital distribution presence, we realized that the impact of that is very heavy around customer experience, right? Versus our agent broker, our policy holder, from the claims spectrum all the way through. And we were realizing it was becoming a lot more automated in that aspect, and it's very impactful. So my role just expanded without giving any of those other responsibilities up to now include that experience side of things. So as we're looking at our strategy and kind of our long-term execution of that, it's always taking that lens of how best to do this for any of those audiences that we're doing. I mean, everything from personas to journey mapping to is this the right way to put this on the digital platform, or is that a product we want on the platform for them? Because as a company, we could say this makes a ton of sense, but if nobody wants it, that whole build it, they will come doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of carriers have seen that directly, that they shoot ahead with some new platform or experience something, and it kind of falls flat, or the adoption's not the way it is, or customers are grumbling and they thought it was the end all be all. It's like, well, did you ever talk to them? Maybe it wasn't kind of what they needed.
Right.
So is it, it sounds like it was sort of born out of more of a distribution focus. Is it still very, when you think about customer experience in your role, is it about the distribution story, or does it span the entire life cycle?
That's the first step, right? Just because since that's where it was born out of, there was the immediate need. But then as we started, kind of planning on with our strategy, it's morphed into a lot more, right? So I know when we've talked before, it was around claims, how does that work? Well, we're starting very much on the humanizing aspect. We're looking at technology scenarios and where we can experiment there, but we got a long road to go on the claims side for that. Some of these, I feel like you mentioned personal lines, we can take lessons learned from that, right? Because it's I don't want to say it's easier, but it's I think from a market, it's more acceptable to kind of try things in that space, because there's a high desire to want to interact that way. I think commercial, there's certain areas that has higher potential than others, especially when you get into specialty. It's like, where does that even fit even more? So trying to take the lessons learned from that and then bring them into our space is what we're trying to do now. I would say when you look at the evolution of that we're not on the leading edge. I think I would love to be, but we're kind of more in that catching up, I think, to the general insurance market, just because of for the specialty space. I think we're ahead, right? We're probably to the front of that line if you're really niching it down to specialty, but in insurance as a whole, we're still trying to get our feet going and really get blazing on the trail.
Well, and I mean, I get that. And I think it's good to recognize, like, we have our strengths, and in some circles, we being the company are far ahead of where the market is, or we're out in front. But our space as a whole, it's like when you're leading the back of the pack, you still have to recognize, like, we still have a ways to go. But you have a complication in a lot of commercial lines. You'll see this, but that personal lines doesn't have, is the personal lines buyer is the customer. And yes, there may be an agent involved. And so you think about, there's more than one person there, but you add another layer, because it's like you have your distribution point, agent, broker, whatever. Then you have the insurance buyer, which is company owner, CFO, risk manager, like some corporate kind of person. And then you have the actual, you insure a fleet. It's whoever bought the commercial trucking coverage or the freight coverage that's going on there, but then it's the drivers, or it's the people on the receiving end of that freight. There's so many more parties that we can debate who the actual customer is, but like, they are all a customer of at some point in the process, and different things that you're doing. So it's just, there's so many nuances to it, I think, that you would never get in personal lines.
Well, and even for us, it gets even another step removed, right? Because like you mentioned, somebody's probably buying, the regular casualty insurance for their fleet. Well, the cargo side of that, if it's big enough to where it's monoline and we're on it, we're kind of that secondary carrier in their mind from the insured's aspect. So when they have a claim, they're probably thinking whoever they're seeing the auto IDs for and everybody every day, and it could be a totally different carrier than us. Like, that might not be a Berkley company at all. Right. And there we are on this cargo. So that connection, that relationship with us is tougher, because we're not dealing with them on a very consistent basis. And then we do have the agent broker typically, because it's the only way we're distributing, but from a contact aspect, we're dealing with them most of the time, right?
And they're involved.
You're right. So when you're looking at what audience do you focus on, we got to look at both. We just got to think about when is each one more impacted, and how do we, streamline that. I think we talked some from claims specifically, where it's very heavy on the insured policyholder side. I know from our prior conversations, we've had a lot of impact from, feedback from an insured to their broker not wanting to market an account because of interactions they've had with our claims department, specific adjusters, and things that we do, just because of the specialty niche. It's all our claims team does is inland marine losses. Like, it's not part of a big company where they're doing product and auto, and then, hey, we're also going to, adjust your cargo claim, the one that we do every quarter. This is all they do. And we even have specialists that kind of do a lot of cargo or builder's risk. We even have specialists within our team on that aspect. So the nuances that we bring in, the value, whenever they do have a claim, the value comes out very high to them. So that impacts our relationship with the broker, because they're happy, but then we have some long-term insureds that aren't going anywhere because of that experience. So it's how do we maximize that? How do we continue to grow that? Because we're not top of mind every day.
Well, the other nuance is, you just listed, a few different kinds of customers or lines of business where the customers are wildly different. Like a builder is very different from like a logistics company or what have you. So even, the term specialist, like, it's like specialist within a specialist within a specialist, to be able to serve that specific customer's needs at that point in the journey, when that's who you're facing, versus, the agent or the broker, the distributor is largely the same wherever they sit in that process. It's still the same person. They might have a vertical expertise, but the end customer or the end insured is pretty different across different segments that you're writing, the different lines of business. It's just another point of complication I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard for us to make a consistent item to be implemented that just fits everything. So I think, as we were talking in the beginning of this, where are we at on that journey? It's kind of starting in distribution. I think it's because it's the easiest thing to start with, right? Like, I think, that's probably the one thing that's close to kind of being consistent across the board. But once you get past that, to your point, the needs are so very different. And we're still trying to get our hands around all of that to say, okay, what is our path for each of those verticals, and how much is different or is the same? We're still figuring that out, but we are seeing the nuances there entirely. Like we even have broker partners that are specialists, right? That all they might do is transportation. Right. And then we're dealing with them for the cargo side. Well, then we might have another agency that is purely construction based, and our builders risk and CE contractors equipment is a big deal to them. The processes for those two products are different. I mean, just what they want, how they want to interact, the type of coverage needs, and like the certificates of insurance needs, like they're different. So, and to them, that's all they know. And we got to get that feedback, because you talk to them or you talk to a generalist, the generalist kind of compares it to everything else they're already experiencing with their other carriers. And these guys have a very specific lens that they want to solve for. So we have the persona work on my end is it's a complicated aspect. Like I don't have just a couple personas that I can look at. I'm trying to figure out, what big diagram of personas that I need to end up with.
So does that create scale complications for you that like, look, we can never solve for this because it's too small? Or is it more the kinds of solutions we need to look for need to be ones that could be broadly applied or have the flexibility? Maybe it is about a person versus like, it's just an AI and it just does the same thing over and over again. So that it has more of that flexibility or customization. Is that sort of where a lot of the decision making comes in?
Yeah, and I would say it's both parts, right? Like there's a lot that says, hey, we need to have things that are consistent as much as possible. Let's just determine those and get them out there. But then we also, when we look at any type of solution, the first conversation is how flexible is it? Because if I'm working on a distribution platform, what's needed for cargo is very different than builder's risk, and I got to be able to solve both needs. So I can't approach something with a singular solution and say, okay, let's get this, and now let's go look at this one separately. So it's always with that lens. It's, can I solve it or can I not? And if I can't, then I got to figure out, is this a big deal, or can I move on, or do I pass on it entirely because there's not enough win to do that one solution versus doing something else that can impact all areas, right?
Yeah. I feel like all I'm doing is coming up with complications and pushback for you, but another one is, Berkley has a number of different vertical focused or lines of business focused, segment focused, whatever. And like you said, you may work with a broker who's more of a generalist, who may interact with multiple Berkley teams or businesses. Does that come up as well, that you're thinking about, we're doing what we're doing in fire and marine, but we also need to be aligned with what's happening elsewhere? As a group, do you also think about that flexibility, that'd be nice, but our units need to be autonomous in this sort of customer experience decisioning they're doing?
I feel like I keep saying yes and yes to your question.
It just means I'm asking the right questions.
Yeah, maybe. No, I mean, obviously our number one focus is how do we, in our autonomous state, right? Like we got to make sure that we are nailing our niche and our vertical as much as we can. Where there can be overlap and where we can partner and kind of do things and scale within solutions, absolutely, that's things that we're getting looked at and determined, and there's conversations company-wide for that to say, where can we kind of align and bring that better experience for the broker partners, right? Because like you said, if they're working with multiple, how do we make that as easy as possible? But it's not ever going to take away from us excelling at our niche, right? Yeah. So like when even within our own products, like you were talking about, I'm not going to do something that's going to make it consistent for cargo, builder's risk, and contractor's equipment or whatever else, if it's going to take away something from one of those products or the experience that could be better with cargo just to streamline it. So we always have to be looking at, how do we maximize it? Consistency where possible, but experience is number one for each of those items.
Yeah. And then blowing that up to the bigger picture. I mean, it makes sense that, as I looked at Berkley versus some of the other, commercial lines players, there does seem to be this kind of freedom and autonomy for the specific, companies within the umbrella to do what's necessary for that vertical, which I think has served you really well in serving those needs for that particular business unit and the customers of it. Where some other carriers, they've taken the broad brush approach that, like, not saying one's right or one's wrong, but it's maybe had more compromises in the individual verticals. or, sub business units for the sake of the mothership needs to be, a certain way. Two different ways to skin the cat. But as a specialist person myself, as I've always admired that like, this space matters and needs to be served the way it needs to be served. And that seems to be more of the guiding principle. So that's what I'm taking from what you're saying as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that's the vision that I feel has been core, even since I came here, that I've picked up on, right? Like it's, for us, it's to be specialized and specific, and we know our business better than anybody, right? Like it's that's the core of that. And then you piece all those together and you get the mothership, as you said. But it does give us the flexibility and the needs to react to our individual market, to our products. Like it creates that empowerment, I think, to really make sure that we are delivering what's needed to be successful.
Yeah. Well, you did say overall for specialty lines, it's still early days. Given that, ask you to do some future telling, like where are things going then? If it is early, where do you see us needing to focus, or do you feel an energy of that, like this is where there seems to be a push, or maybe there needs to be a push?
Yeah. I mean, in insurance as a whole, there's still a ton of energy and a lot of movement, right? And I think there's still, some speculation on where that's going to end and what that's going to look like. As you look at kind of the specialty lines, kind of specialty markets, it needs a push. I mean, the things that we're doing right now that in our space feels innovative, in my mind, coming from other areas of insurance before getting into this specialty market, feels behind the times, right? So in our market, it's nobody's doing this. This is new. But it's something that's been being done for years, right? Like it's how do we catapult? How do we get out there a little further, catch up with the rest of the insurance space? And that's where I was saying earlier, I feel like we're probably as at the front of the line when it comes to specialty lines for some of the stuff that we're doing. But when you look at the industry as a whole, you see some really flashy things that may or may not work, but they're able to experiment and try that, and we're not there yet. At least not for Berkley Fire Marine, right? Like we're trying to get up to that front line. But as I look at it and just say what needs to happen, it's true for our space. It's true for personal. I think it's true for small commercial, micro commercial. Is when you start looking at what the customer buying patterns are, and as the evolution is happening, as you and I have discussed, and you got somebody the way they're buying now, and they're just buying personal insurance, but they become the business owner in 5 years, 10 years, and now they've had that experience. They enjoy that. They're expecting that now when they buy their small commercial policy because they own their own retail business or whatever contractor business, whatever that is. They want that same interaction and flexibility. It's just not there yet. So, we have to start to be able to deliver to that, or the one who does is going to be the choice, right? Or the choice is. And I think, what I am seeing in the research that I'm seeing, is really showing the need for option omni-channel, right? Like there's multi-channel, you can different ways that you can buy, but that experience of moving from one to the other usually is not that convenient for the insured at the end of the day.
Sure.
So truly making an omni-channel experience for them, and allowing flexibility for either the way whether you're dealing with embedded or you're dealing with usage based, or just the types of policy coverage add-on takeoffs over the annualization of the policy. That flexibility, it needs to be easy, and nothing about the processing side of insurance is easy today. You see some flashy things for, hey, you can issue a policy pretty quickly, right? What we'll call the front end side. A lot of solutions out there for that, and that can be pretty seamless. But once you get past that, it now gets a little more complex, and that's where the experience, I think, falls off the cliff for most companies out there. So I think that's the big thing in the next 5 years. I don't know if it's a carrier or an insurtech platform. Somebody's going to come out there with what that new base is that everybody needs to plug into, right? And wins the race of what we'll call, kind of like back in the day with DVDs and, HD DVD or Sony Blu-ray. They were both out there, and finally one wins, and that's what everybody talks. That's the language everybody talks. That's going to have to happen here in the near future. And then I think everybody just starts to work around that.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I'm just thinking about, I've recently changed personal lines carriers but I also, I have commercial policies, and I think for me, it's the opposite. Is the commercial lines so much easier. And to be fair, like there's simpler policies. Is it's a lot clearer. There aren't vehicles to add, and because I don't have commercial auto. But then sort of that digital cliff that you're talking about is like on workers' comp, really easy to get the policy. I had to get a cert, which wasn't hard, but I felt like I was interfacing with an old school mainframe just through the web though. It was like this, it was actually pretty easy, but super antiquated looking and feeling, and these like cryptic emails about the process versus this like really nice, slick. I mean, it's like 30 seconds to get the policy, which is wild. So even though it was digital, it was still like really weird and an antiquated feeling. And like, it's like in claims, like we got the FNOL, but then everything else is, like we need to go past the first step in the process, and not to talk down like policy issuance and quoting out, like that's great and we've come a long way. Just remember, there's a lot more. We don't want it to just be easy and good to become a customer. It also needs to be that way to be a customer. I agree.
The one thing that I've learned since being in the inland marine space is just the flexibility from a regulatory perspective, right? Because, personal lines, your standard kind of commercial, everything is very, everything's admitted, but everything's filed in every single state, right? And for us, it's all admitted, but we're only filed in a handful of states. Everything else, we have flexibility for things. So a lot of the complication comes to getting to that policy administration system and saying, okay, you make these changes, how is that happening? And talking to that legacy system that then is talking to the state regulatory environments that we're filing. Like, the compliance piece is complex for us in general in insurance, right? And I think that's why the cliff exists, because so many of the legacy system debt that people talk about are those core back-end systems that we're making fun front ends to make things easy and just trying to make it talk to something. To your point, it was built probably 40 years ago and it's just been band-aided to the future. And that needs overhauled, but it's costly. And that's the thing that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah. And I do think in specialty lines, the flexibility is a gift and a curse, because it often resulted in like, oh, then this person will be our solution. Like the system, can't deal with all the differences and what states are on and off and whatever. So like we've got this person in compliance who will they'll handle it, and every company had that person who was like 30 years on, and it was like, oh, eventually they may retire and we're still in the old system. And, so you get like spreadsheets and whatever other workarounds. But I agree. I mean, compliance is to think about that up front and to solve for that as part of the flashy front end. It becomes this huge either enabler or blocker, depending how you've enabled it.
Well, even as you mentioned too, the aspect of consistency versus kind of flexibility within things, right? So experience for us isn't just agents and policyholders. Like I got to look at our internal people, right? Underwriters, how are they issuing policies? What does that look like? And as we're trying to automate more and more, from rating, quoting to issuing a policy, even on the kind of traditional, stuff on the back end. Inland marine, the joke is still there about how like you can do a deal on the back of a napkin and make it work, right? Because you can, outside of those handful of states, like you can adjust the rates however you need to. So manuscripting is something that's fairly common in inland marine. And it took me a little bit of time coming here to realize how much complication that brings to processes. Because you have set endorsements, you have things that are set ready to go, and all of a sudden it's like, well, nope, that form doesn't exist, so I'm going to change it. And here's the wording that I want to change it and how I want the coverage to be applied. Here's the rate that's going to be because of it. How do you automate that and make that seamless so an underwriter isn't spending all their time, or yes, you get a library of manuscripts after a certain period of time, then you file them and they become part of the form. But until then, that flexibility is there, which you said is a blessing and a curse, because yes, it allows the underwriter that flexibility to make those complex deals happen. But then system process wise, from an experience for the underwriter, it's not slick. Like it creates bumps. It's like, okay, how do we make that easier for them to do more business?
And it's such a stark difference from like, you can do anything you want on a napkin. So that any sort of structure you put around that is going to be more painful. It's a really tricky thing. we could go on for forever. It's great, but I really do appreciate your perspective, because I think it, you know, as I was saying in the opening, like it is a space that people can very quickly be like, it's all manuscripted, so it doesn't matter. Like IAM's basically like admitted ENS, so just like who cares? Or it's all about the broker, and that's all you need to worry about. That's one of the things you need to worry about when you're thinking about customer experience, but we should have it in mind, or it will always be behind everything, and that gap will just get bigger and bigger.
Right. I think that's the biggest challenge right now, right? Is keeping it front of mind. I think when you talked about in the beginning, my role, like how did this come to be? I think we recognize the need for it to be top of mind, to be a conversation, to be a consideration, because too many times decisions were made just based on how we've always done things, or hey, can we solve this one little problem that makes life easier for us, not really understanding the downstream impacts that has. So it's good that the awareness is there, the conversations are now happening. There's still times that we have to make a decision and go with it, even though it's not ideal for customer experience, but at least we were able to have the dialogue around it, and we made a business decision. Because right now, time, need, cost, whatever the scenario is, you got to weigh it. But at least now, customer experience is one of those items being weighed in all those decisions, which at this point for us was a big win in the last year to really make that ingrained as part of the culture. Yeah,
it's a critical first step. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. It's really good to sit down and talk to you a bit.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Bryan. It's always fun to chat insurance with you.
Thank you to Mark for sitting down and sharing some of his perspective from Berkley Fire and Marine. It's great for me. I always love these chances to dig back into specialty lines, spend so much of my day, small commercial and personal. Nothing wrong with them. I love them too, but it's my home for the last half of my career with specialty. So it's great to reconnect there. And we finished recording, and Mark and I just started like going off about all the things going on in specialty lines. It's really nice, but I appreciate all the time that he gave. And it's interesting because, you know, we presume where this customer experience mindset matters. And the reality is it matters everywhere. There is no part of the market that should be off limits from that mindset of what does a customer need? What does a customer want? And frankly, who the customer is going to be different in each of those moments throughout the customer journey. You know, whether it's the broker or the agent we're working with, if they're in the mix, or maybe it's a platform that we're working with, if it's the buyer, if it's the, you know, maybe it's not the buyer in a particular moment, but it's the end user at the insured, you know, it's the truck driver or the employee or whoever. That's going to change throughout the life cycle of that full customer journey. And if you're not solving for those various needs, you're going to be missing something. And you know, you add in the complexity of the different verticals and the products and the focus that Berkley has in the fire and marine business. Maybe you think it's too much, but you know, you can't handle it. But actually, Mark brings the right perspective, that it's that balance. And you have to think about where can you apply something that needs to be really customized versus where can you have something that could be a more generalized tool and is more scalable. And it's really active discussion, active thought process, no matter what. So thank you again to Mark. Thank you to all of you for joining in. I hope this was valuable, and I will see you back here next time.